All right, we're on. Welcome back to Grit Gym. Welcome back to Grit Gym. We turn the camera around so that hopefully you guys can read this, but this is why deload. Deload is an extremely important tool that we use out of Grit Gym to make sure that your bodies are recovering from the exercises that you do. And the thing is, like, all the magic happens in the recovery portion. No one gets stronger in the weight room. No one loses fat in the weight room. No one loses fat when jogging. No one makes any progress while doing the thing. It's in the recovery portion that all the magic happens. And part of doing a deload is the part where it's not just important to work hard. It is extremely important to work hard, but it's also extremely important to work smart. And that's what we're going to go through today. Eric's here. Eric uses the big words. Eric's got the big beard. He's the Adonis of the group. So we're going to go through how we use this out of Grit Gym, some different ways that you can use it in your own programs, and why a experienced lifter versus a power lifter versus a new person versus kind of just a person that's just been doing it for just a little while, why they would use their deload week just a little different. But do you want to kind of go through the why deload, like your reasoning behind what you think is so important for it?
Yeah, so starting off with what a deload is just, it's a planned period of recovery. And so basically what it does, it allows you to dissipate any stress you've accumulated throughout previous training sessions and get back to kind of a baseline where you're fresh, you're rejuvenated, ready to go. And so it's just another recovery modality that becomes increasingly important the more, the higher your training age or the more experienced you get, it becomes more and more important. And if you saw our talk a few weeks ago on stress recovery adaptation, this is going to really tie into that. If you haven't seen it, go and watch it because you'll have a lot better understanding. But basically, a deload is a way to dissipate that accumulated stress that's masking your performance or causing you to possibly plateau or get burnt out or accumulate injuries, etc. So when we use a deload, here's several factors that could be indicating that you need a deload if you don't have one planned. Ideally, you have one planned into your workout, although it's kind of hard to do, like if you have a coach or without a coach or without knowing your body really well, it can be kind of hard to plan.
Underestimation on, like most people underestimate how well they need to know their body to be able to just go into their own deload without, it's kind of like intuitive eating. Like everybody thinks it's awesome because it is, but at the same time, the difference between boredom, hunger, and thirst are extreme, are extreme. So you have to really be experienced with your body, really have a very intuitive look at like how things are rolling around in you, and you got to be very, very, very self-aware.
Yeah, and going along with that, since it's not like knowing your body isn't a quantitative thing, it's all qualitative.
Right.
Like the only measure you have as to whether it's a success or not is performance, right? So how much it's increasing, if you're getting to where you want to get to. But even that being said, like it could be like you might be increasing performance, but you might still not be as well in tune as you thought. In that you could even get a bigger increase of performance if you did some other. So really hard,
and I think it's really hard for super hard workers.
Yeah.
For the people who are just drivers, like you're a driver like me. Like I'm just like a hammer. Just like keep on. I'm really good at beating my head against the wall. That is not a good idea. So people like me need to program in some kind of deload week. Otherwise, they'll just try to lift as heavy as they can every time, and then you end up with a foot like mine, a knee like mine, a hip like mine, a shoulder like mine, an elbow, a wrist, a neck. Because 10 years ago I didn't, and the 10 years before that I did not listen to myself.
Yeah, and it's like who knows how much of that could have been avoided with proper.
I'm gonna take a while to dress up, right?
Yeah, same here. Totally. So when you need some signs that of when you need a deload would be feeling burnt out mentally. You come to your workouts, you're just not in the zone. You're not focused. You just feel weak overall.
Yeah. Feeling lethargic is a big one. I think people are like, hey, what pre-workout should I use? I'm like, maybe let's look at your sleep. Let's look at your nutrition and figure out why you're feeling like garbage when you walk in the room before we go to how can we add some supplement to make you not feel that way.
And that's a really good point there. Feeling burnt out would indicate a deload only if your sleep and nutrition and other recovery modalities have been consistent, but you're still feeling burnt out. Because that's the first, like a client comes up to us and they talk about feeling burnt out. We're not going to say, oh, okay, we're not going to jump to the conclusion that they need a deload. We're going to first ask about sleep, about nutrition, their recovery in general, because that's going to contribute to that first and foremost. But if your sleep has been consistent, your nutrition's been consistent with your baseline, and or it's even gotten better because you've noticed yourself feeling like that, and then so you start to sleep more, you try to get even more into recovery, and it's going downhill. That could be a pretty good indicator that you need a deload. And the next one that Adam was talking about, feeling banged up or injury, like when you're like on that stress recovery adaptation, we talked about how all stressors get dumped into one bucket. When that bucket starts getting full and overflows, you're gonna start feeling banged up. You might get a string of injuries that aren't really related, or just little aches and
you might not even think of them as injuries. You might just like
aches and pains.
Yeah, just aches and pains.
And you just start noticing them piling up more so than they often would. You're you're not able to recover enough to kind of keep those injuries under control. So, and it might be something like you had an old injury that hasn't been bugging you for years, and then you kind of got, it popped up again. That could be a good sign that your stress levels are high.
And we've been using stress a lot too. We should mention, stress is a very, very good thing,
right?
To a point. Like, we want to use stress as a tool to push us to a new level. We don't want to let stress push us into a space where it's not healthy. So just a distinction to make clear right there.
Right. Yeah. And like we said at the beginning, if we're saying stress here and you're not really sure what we're talking about, go back, check out the stress recovery adaptation video we did, because that's going to put it into context, and we can't really get into it here because it's a 30-minute video by itself. And then another reason would be functional overreaching, or basically this would be a planned deload within the program. So say, and this is more used by more advanced people. So for example, say you're taking a deload every 4th week, and the 3 weeks leading up to it, you're doing a unsustainable amount of stress in that you couldn't carry over, you couldn't keep doing that for any more than a set amount of weeks, or else you would get burnt out. But you do that to the point right where you're overreaching, you haven't really got to overtraining, you haven't got to that big burnout state, but you're really starting to feel it, and then you add a deload right at that point, so you impose this big stressor over time, over these weeks, to demand a big adaptation or response, but you have to give a really big recovery resource of like a week to that to see those adaptations.
Full commitment to the recovery. You've got to treat your recovery like you were treating your workouts.
Right.
Only like the reverse. Like, you're not going to foam roll your way out of that one.
That's a really good, I like that. Treat your recovery like you treat your workouts. That's like gold. That's really good. Okay, so that would be when you might need a deload, and then we're going into how. We have all these different modalities. They're all good. Some are better for certain situations than others. You want to start us off?
Yeah. Well, at Grit, we do it pretty simple. We just what we do number 5. We almost, for everybody walking through the door at Grit Gym is not a professional powerlifter, so they can handle a little bit more volume. They can handle over periods of time, back-to-back weeks. So we do an introductory week where we just do two sets of each exercise at a little bit of a lower intensity, so a little bit lower weight, and so that and we're focusing on commanding the proficiency of the movement. So we're not focusing on how much can we lift or how fast we can lift it. We're looking at how we're actually moving and what we're actually trying to get out of that exercise, so that we allow the body to learn. So, because we want full competency in that first week, so that we reap the benefits of it in week 2 and in week 3 and in week 4. So that's what we do. We just do an introductory week where it's just a little bit less. I know a lot of people, they do it a little different than that, but that's how we do it. Because if we didn't, there'd be so much instruction on that first day that, your workout would take you 3 hours. So this one works out really well for us. But what one with your own training, what do you use the most?
So I do active rest. Maybe we should let's just go in order, and then we'll go back. I think will be the easiest, so we don't forget.
Yeah.
And you can imagine, just think of all this deloading modality is just dissipating the total amount of stress, but it does it to different degrees and in different ways. So we're starting number one here. We got you can just reduce your volume, right? And we've said how volume is just the total workload or how many total pounds you've lifted it under, and it can usually be grouped into a movement pattern. But so for an easy example, you do squats, you do 10 sets.
That's a lot of sets. That's a lot of sets.
So say, just a really easy example, you do one set of 10 at 100 pounds, you've done 1,000 pounds of squatting, of knee dominant, bilateral knee dominant work. But so you can imagine, say we reduce volume. Say you usually do 3 sets of 10, but maybe you picked a deload one week and you just do 1 set of 10. So now you are decreasing the total amount of stress you're accumulating. Your body's used to doing more than that, so it can have some extra resource to recover there.
Right. So you either decrease, you're going to decrease one, but this is the thing that, and we're going to get into common mistakes here in a second. But the next one, like reducing intensity, you just decrease the amount weight that you're using on the bar or the speed that you're lifting it at. Most of the time, it's going to be weight on the bar. We would have to get into some pretty higher up stuff to look at speed of the bar. But reducing intensity is just basically lowering the weight that you're going to use so that it feels light.
Yep.
So that you can just learn the exercise. Do you want to explain a testing week?
Yeah. So testing week would be basically a week where you're taking the whole week off. Besides that, you're using a few of the days to test out on a specific exercise, so test where your max is at, right? Because you can always base a max off a certain amount of reps, but say you can do a 3-set max or 3-rep max set, so you get that 3rd rep. That's the very last set you could do, and then there's conversion charts for that. However, it's not always 100% accurate, and the farther you get away from 1 rep, the less accurate it is.
Yeah,
and
like we use a conversion chart just to make things because you have to base off
coaching.
You have to base off of something. It's never gonna. I don't know. Maybe we do get to a point someday where it's like an exact science. But you're collecting as much data as you possibly can, and you're making an extremely educated guess. So we use a conversion chart, but he's right. Like you get up into your 12s, 10s, 15s type of reps, and it's like, well, we're really far away from a 1 rep.
It's not specific enough to be accurate, but that's exactly the reason why you'd use the testing weeks. So generally, you'd want to know where you're at, so that you can then prescribe your intensities over the next workout. And I don't think we've mentioned this in this talk yet. Intensity % of 1 rep maximum.
Oh yeah, we could have said that.
Is what intensity means.
And this is usually for a little bit more of an advanced lifter too. This isn't for a person that, in their first probably even 5 years of lifting. This is somebody that's been doing it for a little while.
Yep.
Consistently for a little while.
There's no reason to take someone. We generally work with just general population, trying to get more healthy, stronger, etc.
Live their life to experience it their way. Yeah.
If there'd be no reason for us to actually give them a true 1RM test, because the risk of injury is high.
Yeah.
But also they're just not that competent with the movement.
And what are you getting out of it?
Right. And maybe we get a little more accurate on their 1RM prescription, but they're gaining strength at a rate so fast anyway that they're already a lot of times outworking their program that's already prescribed off a 1 rep max. So it's the risks do not match.
Not even close.
Way more than the reward.
Yeah, the return on investment is pretty low. And a prehab week is actually the next one is prehab week. Prehab week is actually pretty simple. You do like a version of the tune-up out here. That's a tune-up workout is. Basically, a lot of foam rolling, a lot of mobility type exercises, a lot of stability type exercises. I know one of the things that I really like to do, and a lot of other coaches like to do, I don't know how often you do this, but I just take my warm up and I do it 3 times and I leave.
Yep.
But you would do that every day for an entire week, every time that you hit the gym.
And that's also assuming that your warm up is designed to be prehab in a sense. So which ours are, and so we assume that. But if that doesn't really mean a lot of people have a warm up, like walking on a treadmill for 10 minutes, or there's so many different types of warm ups. But it's generally taking every joint through its full range of motion, as well as activating muscle groups that tend to be lagging. So another way you could do your prehab week, after you doing your warm ups, but also working on muscle groups that tend to be underactive or underdeveloped, and then have big correlations with injury. So example, like you could be doing things like isolating your external rotator, your rotator cuff, which has a big correlation with injury, or your glute medius, right? Getting that to strengthening that, your low traps, etc.
Yeah. Just those exercises that seem like they're doing nothing, but they're really pretty huge for your health and your recovery. Those are the ones you want to add in. So like monster walks where you're walking sideways with a band around your knees, or different kind of like core exercises that seem silly. Just warm up exercises.
Yep.
Introduction week, we already went over that. Complete rest week. Does anybody not understand complete rest week? This was pretty self-explanatory. You just don't do anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you literally don't even go to the gym.
So, and a big, like looking at that, it doesn't look very smart. And like to some degree it doesn't. There's a lot of things that you don't get out of that. But one, like, depending on how taxing that last cycle was, it could actually be necessary, but also on a complete rest week where you're not even doing any resistance training, your sensitivity to that training is increasing, so you're getting more sensitive. So there's something called the law of accommodation, so that basically states you can't get stronger doing the same thing on the same weight. So say you're doing 3 sets of 5 on 135 pounds, you keep doing that week over week, you'll actually get weaker because you become desensitized to that stress, and it doesn't basically demand your body to adapt to it. So with that complete rest week, the big benefit there is that you are gonna, out of all these modalities, you're gonna resensitize to the highest degree. But that being said, you are missing out on a lot of stuff there, right? Because like when you come back after 7 days off, totally off, like everything's gonna feel pretty hard again. You're gonna get really sore again. Right, that's one of the big things. Like
if you're me,
I'd say most people, I'd be really sore as well.
Yeah, and then something to keep in mind. This is another one this isn't for a beginner. Right, a beginner would not use a complete rest week. It'd be pointless. It'd be really stupid. It'd probably be detrimental to their progress. This would be for like a very advanced person. This is like pre-professional level.
Yeah, for sure.
Because some of those pro guys, take like a month off.
Yeah, Olympic like weightlifters, right. Especially Europeans. It's really common for them to take a month off.
They look at it like a job.
Yeah, right. And that's like
they don't look at it like us.
And so they'll actually, like, there's a month out of the year where they might not even be able to get anywhere near their max because they're not trained, but in general that allows them to not get burnt out during their career. It allows them to stay sensitive to training and to basically stay injury free.
Keep in mind though, these guys are like communistic countries where that like literally is their job. 100%. It is their job. It's not like they have a job and then they do this other thing that they kind of like to do. It is their job. 100%. Active rest week, do you want to go for that one?
Yeah, sure. So active rest week is where you're staying active, but you're changing the modality of your training. So if you're a lifter, to stay active, you might go to things like cycling, swimming, walking, etc., or vice versa. If you're an endurance athlete, you might hit the resistance training a little harder. So this also has a big positive benefit of increasing your sensitivity, but basically taxing your body in a different way that lets other things heal, and the total level of stress will be less, because if you're an endurance athlete, you're not going to be able to lift as much weight, so relatively you're not taxing your body as much. Same thing if you're a strength athlete and you go for a swim, you're not going to be able to do 10,000 meters and tax yourself there. So since you're going to a different modality,
it wouldn't work out
that
well.
Right.
You see a lot of people.
Then it would not end up being a deload, right? Yeah. So that could be a comment.
Yeah. And then reactive training deload week is probably actually my favorite, but I'm a person that this is like, for me, this is like doing the things that you really enjoy. Mm-hmm. Like I'm just like, nobody likes chin-ups unless they're good at chin-ups.
Yeah.
And then they like chin-ups, right? Well, I like reactive training, so reactive training is, I respond really well to reactive training because I'm already good at it. So like reactive training week would be like, use more, like you go away from the weights and you use more like medicine ball, explosive type stuff. You do more plyometrics, like jumping over hurdles, that kind of thing. I don't know. I don't know. Is that a good way to explain it?
Yeah, or vice versa too. So you're dropping one or the other. So
oh yeah, good point. Yeah,
it could also be taking out the high CNS fatigue and stuff like sprinting, jumping, etc., and keeping your other weights the same, or vice versa. You could take out the weights and just do that stuff, depending on what your goals are, and which one is more specific to your goals.
And planning for the PR deload week. You were good.
Yeah. So this one is kind of like a testing week, but it's even more so. So say you might be going like competing in powerlifting would be a good example of this. Say you do 3 weeks of high intensity training, you accumulate a bunch of stress, and then you have a meet, you have a week off before a meet where you want a PR, you want to do an all-time PR, and then this 4th week you would spend still doing the movement. So if you're a powerlifter, you would still, and this could be called greasing the groove. It's basically just keeping your motor patterns fresh.
That's good.
And so like what you might do on that 4th week is at a low intensity, like basically you're reducing volume and intensity in most cases, but you're still doing those movements that you plan on PRing in, so they stay really fresh. And you might even do them every day or every other day during that, but the intensity and volume is so low that it's allowing your net amount of stress to be lower, and you can get a big recovery.
You do it like that. So you'd be up, down, so that you can PR here.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then...
Can you tell who wrote? Can you tell? Can you tell who wrote everything up on the board? Mrs. Roberts said my handwriting is awesome. Never got any better. Easy strength is the one that I follow. Exercise reduction and drop. Go for it.
Okay, yeah. So exercise reduction week. Basically, you're just dropping the least important exercises. These are the ones that are generally at the end of your program. So you might be dropping, and it's hard to say like least important, but in the context, like you might be dropping some additional, well, here's an easy example. If you do arms at the end of your program, right? Like that's the least important thing, one, because you're already working those muscles and more compound movements, but like as far as performance as well. So you would decrease your total amount of volume and stress by maybe cutting off that last third of your workout, but still being able to progress in those other movements, like your squat, knee dominant type, hip dominant type, upper body compound exercises. You're still progressing in that during the week, but since the whole total amount of volume is lower, the amount of exercises, you're in the gym for less time, you're accumulating less stress, and then you're able to basically dissipate that extra stress and get back to being fresh.
Excuse me, guys.
Yeah, and then...
this one I think is important to think of. It's extremely conceptual. It isn't meant to be... Oh, what's going on here? I don't know. Anyway, it's like, this is one where it's really good to have a coach to tell you, what is your least important exercise.
Yeah, and that might also change depending on what your goals are. So like for general population, it might be worth drop. Like a back squat might not be your most important because like you have a ton of axial loading. Maybe you want to deload from that, whereas a powerlifter or strength athlete wouldn't drop some.
Or you're recovering. You're coming in out of physical therapy. This might be a totally different deal. Like when I say extremely conceptual, I mean extremely.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You come out of physical therapy, those exercises are probably the most important things over. Even if they're isolation exercises, they can still be the most important because they're getting you back to your baseline so that you can further progress.
Right. Yeah. Yep. And then the last one is actually the one that I personally follow. It's more of an easy strength. It's not exactly, if you read the book Easy Strength by Dan John, this is like, I've actually talked with Jen. I met him in a hallway once and we talked about easy strength for about 15 minutes. He was like, I wish I would have never written that book. And I was like, why? Dude, that book like changed my world around strength conditioning. But basically easy strength is like you don't touch a weight that feels heavy until you go to max out or until you go to test out. So basically that's what I live in, is I live in about 50 to 70% of my 1 rep max, depending on the day, for about 3 weeks. And then on that final week, then I'll kind of up the ante a little bit. But I think that takes some time to figure out. But part of the reason I follow this is because I work like over 80 hours a week, you know? So like my body is so stressed out, it's not just going to come in. I'm not going to be able to take the pounding that I did when I was 19 and could sleep 10 hours a day and go do everything that I wanted to do, because I'm not 19 anymore and I work all the time, and it's just different. But that's the one that I follow. I like it a lot. I think you can basically work for any range. I think it could probably work. It could definitely work for like an elite level powerlifter. It could definitely work for. But you would have to be extremely intuitive and have a really good relationship with your body. And the hardest thing about this is putting the ego aside. Some days you're just not going to be able to lift very much. Anyway, have you tried that one out? Or you
haven't. Yeah. No, I think for you that so looking at that, you could kind of think of like that graph you drew up there. It's the opposite of that, where you're staying pretty low for 3 weeks and then going high on the last. And like in your case, I just from the stories you've told me about when opening your business, working 80-hour weeks while at the same time getting 45 hours of sleep a night and still training, right? And you have someone who's really good at pushing themselves to the limit, and so they don't let it affect them, and they still try to hit their numbers. Like I think you got to an actual state of overtraining, actual overtraining, right?
I know I did.
Which actual overtraining is where, like we talked about overreaching, you stay in this overreaching state that's not sustainable, and you keep doing it and you keep doing it. It takes a certain mindset, and you do it for so long that on the back end to get off of that, it takes months to years of to come back out of that. So like I think for you, you're still that's a method of you recovering. That I think that's
Probably.
why you would do better off this than the other one, because you're still possibly recovering from all that, and you're still, and I mean, you still have more stress than most people because you're a business owner.
Well, yeah, I basically got on the verge of killing myself, or not like suicide. That's not what that was, but of pushing myself to this limit that is just miserable for like 5 or 6 years, and so now it works better. So what you do for this one is you keep your intensity and you keep your volume about the same, but you keep your intensity pretty low for 3 weeks, and then the final week you up it so that you can kind of figure out a little bit about where you are there, but you're just kind of managing your stress in the other 3 weeks. But I would say that this week kicks my ass. This week it takes me basically those next 3 weeks to recover off of too, like what you were just saying. Yeah, it's really important.
And so and then that brings us to common errors, and basically all these errors have one thing common, and that's that you're doing one of these things, but then you're adding something back in, so the net amount of stress, the total amount of stress is still the same. Like you might be changing something up, but if you're still accumulating that much stress, then you're not really doing yourself justice, and you're not you're not doing what the deload week is for.
Right.
It's to have an easy week so you can fully recover from this thing. So
and this is one of the mistakes that I made for a long time. Was I knew that I needed to make it. This is why easy strength changed for me. Because I've been lifting since 1997, and then, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago is when I read Easy Strength or whatever it was. But I would always decrease my volume, but as soon as I decreased my volume, I would increase my intensity. Right. Well, that's not a deload week, right? Because that's still the same. Or I would do the opposite. And so that's one of the big mistakes. So how do you do a deload week? What do all of these have in common? You're decreasing volume, or you're decreasing intensity, or you're decreasing rest between exercises, or you're regressing the exercise. You're making it easier on some level so that your body can recover. But if you're making it harder on one and easier on another, you're just tipping the scales.
It's just evening out in the long run. You're not getting anywhere. And so, like we said earlier, say you're doing an active rest week and you're a powerlifter, and you somehow you spend 3 or 4 hours there swimming that 10,000. Because you're using swimming as your active.
You gotta go hard, bro.
Recovery modality, and then you end up getting just as much stress as you would normally. So you're kind of defeating the purpose there. So that's kind of just.
It's easy to do.
It's really easy to do. It's especially because on that, for most people who are super obsessed with lifting, taking a deload week might be harder than your regular weeks, even though it's totally necessary. And then you end up.
That's what Karen and I were talking about that one day with Do It Anyway.
Yeah.
She was like, but I want to do it anyway. It's like, no, do it anyway sometimes is doing the thing that you're uncomfortable with, which for you is not going hard for that that portion of the exercise.
Yeah, and we're both like that too. It's going to be it's really easy for us to, while we have to keep some variables low to try to increase others, just because we want to feel like we're still pushing something. But in the long run, it's going to set you back. So you got to realize why you're doing it.
Right. And there's a very fine line between tough and stupid. If anybody, I don't know where that line is. If you know, do tell, because I haven't figured it out yet. But I cross that line between tough and stupid all the time. Injuries to prove it. But any other common errors? I mean, that's basically...
you could apply that to anything. It's basically you're just while you're decreasing one thing, you're increasing another, even if it's not related. And it could be just if you're increasing that total amount of stress you're accumulating, you're not deloading.
Yeah. Yeah, so I really encourage you to pick one of these. Some of these are more advanced than others. I think if you're like the introductory week, I think this is one that if you're in your first 5 years of training, you might as well just use this. It's good. A testing week, a prehab week, those are a little bit more advanced. A complete rest week is way advanced. Active rest week, same thing. Like some of these are more advanced than others, but yeah, if you're in your first 5 years of training, definitely. The 1, 2, and then 5
this probably be really useful for older clients.
Yeah, right. Yeah, if you're above 50 years old, you might do that. You might use the prehab week one. I don't know, 50 might even be kind of low.
Yeah, I mean, and just depending on your injury history, that might be a really good one for you. Or if you just are like don't respond well to stress in general.
Right. Yeah, you get really sore really easy. Maybe use prehab week.
But yeah, so there's so much individual variation. Those are really good ones to start with, but try different. You can try different ways, see what works best for you.
Yeah. And this is probably the best one to start with. I think hands down, no doubt about it.
Assuming your movements are changing every cycle.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. And most people are gonna you can keep your exercises for about 10 weeks, but you can play with but most people are gonna respond really well to a 4 to 6 week phase.
And you solve a lot of other problems by changing the exercise selection more frequently. So
yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's effective for 4 to 6 weeks and then never effective again. But anything else? Did you guys get something out of that?
I hope you did. I hope everyone understood that. But.
Yeah, me too. Anyway, thanks for being here, guys. Please slap the share button, send this out to everybody you know. This is from a strength training. This is something that the strength training world just does not talk about enough. Not just the recovery portion, but how kind of impactful and the deload week can be. It's probably, it is extremely important. I'll just leave it there. But anyway. Thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. Please share the video out. It helps us out a ton, and hopefully it helps out more people that watch it. But anyway, thanks guys. We'll see you soon.